Dave Kurten, you've got 5 days left of campaigning. First of all, what's it been like campaigning here today outside Islington Town Hall?
You know, it's been really nice being here because, I mean, this is an issue which is really important to a lot of people around London, particularly in Islington, with the low traffic neighbourhoods and the ULEZ extension and the pop-up cycle lanes and the street space barriers, all these kind of things that have been put in or are being threatened to be put in over the next few months, which are a disaster to Londoners, disaster to motorists, people who need to use their cars, businesses and emergency vehicles. You know, I just want to make London right again, bring some common sense back to London. So, you know, everyone out here today wants the same thing. They want to get rid of these road blockages which should never have been put in the first place. So this is something that I want to make an absolute priority to do, and I'm very happy here to meet people who are of the same mind.
Yeah, part and parcel of the decisions that came about putting in these LTNs and the period in which they were taken. Obviously, we recorded that earlier when you gave a speech to the crowd. But the question has to be, the devices that they're using is called consensus politics. Can you just run us past what consensus is?
Yeah, I think with the moment we're under emergency legislation because of the Coronavirus Act. So they're doing things without using the proper democratic process of consultation. And so these low traffic neighbourhood blockages, for example, they haven't had a proper consultation on. But the idea that they have is that they are just doing these things. And if we don't disagree, if we don't push back, then we are basically giving our consent. I mean, this is how the people, you know, the two big parties who are pushing this kind of thing with the Greens as well, this is what they think, you know, and this is how they think. We need to actually say, we don't want them, this is wrong, we want our streets back, we do not consent to this, and then get them removed.
Now, obviously, the campaign started in a very granular fashion, something about 18 months ago when people started realising something was wrong. And obviously, it was exacerbated by the Coronavirus Act. But it does appear they slipped these matters in under the radar. And in doing so, they've affected a lot of businesses. What have you found on your journey to trying to become the next mayor of London? What have you found from businesses regarding this matter?
Yeah, businesses, particularly small businesses and traders and so on, hate this because they can't move around. You know, they need to use someone who has maybe 1 or 2 vans or something. It's a disaster for them because they need to take 2 or 3 times as long to get somewhere to do a delivery or something as they would normally take. So far from actually lowering the amount of traffic, it's increasing the amount of traffic on the roads. There's more congestion, there's more pollution, everything takes longer, and of course that affects businesses who can't get into the low traffic neighbourhoods except through one entrance and have to take a lot longer to do so.
Well, obviously this is all political because it plays out in a political top echelon, such as town halls, such as City Hall, and obviously the Houses of Parliament, the Commons and the Lords. Now, there must be a reason behind this. Is this anything to do with the United Nations agenda, as we hear?
Yeah, I mean, that's the agenda behind it. There's Agenda 21, there's Agenda 2030, there's the 17 Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations that goes along with this. I think the push that they want is to create what they call smart cities, where everyone will be walking and cycling around. There won't be many vehicles on the roads. And a concept that I started to hear in the last year or two is the idea of a 15-minute neighbourhood. So people will live in their little neighbourhoods. They won't need to go or walk more than 15 minutes from their house, but basically stay in, work from home, even get deliveries come to them on a drone or something in the future. But they, you know, some people ideologically want to get rid of motor vehicles and stop people from having their own private cars. The people that are pushing Agenda 2030 are very, very much against private car ownership. And this is 1 or 2 steps towards making life more difficult for individuals.
Well, it does appear to be, I mean, I grew up in the country myself, and what you do is you would pen sheep in when you want to do something to them. I look out here today and I see for the first time that Islington decided to introduce a pen system of a gate fence around where they thought the process would be. Now, no one's objected to it at this particular point, however, it wasn't there before. But penning people in this way when they want to protest, it doesn't seem quite right. It doesn't sit very easy, I don't think. How does it sit with you? Would you agree to that?
I think it's appalling, and I think these things, measures are being done almost without people realising it. A little bit at a time, a few months later, a little bit more, a few months later, something else. And it's like, well, we're not actually stopping you from going in and out, but they put a fence around where, you know, you might have been able to walk somewhere before, but you can't anymore. And so, you know, I've noticed this sort of like big security barriers, fences going up around a lot of schools, for example. Schools all have security gates on them now. 10 years ago, hardly any of them did. So bit by bit, slowly, we are actually finding our cityscape transformed, almost without us realizing it. So you have to keep your eyes open and watch what's going on and say no. You know, these things are done, they'll have some kind of consultation, but they'll just put a little notice on a tree or something so hardly anyone notices it, and then they do it anyway. But this is not really informed consent. They would say it is, but it isn't really. But you've got to really keep your eyes peeled upon what the politicians and the councils and the government are doing, because they're going to introduce Agenda 2030 step by step by step, almost without you realizing it. And then you'll get to 10 years' time and you'll realize what's happened to our city. What's happened? It's completely changed, and our freedom to move around has gone. That's absolutely wrong. It's very disturbing, and I don't want that if I'm the Mayor of London.
So a vote for you as Mayor for London will be to start reversing these measures as quickly as possible.
Absolutely, we need to reverse them, yeah.
A lot of people have looked at other candidates too, and some of them are saying something along the same lines that you are, that clearly there are agendas, there is consensus politics, and people are having their rights taken away. And it's quite right for an independent candidate to think that way. Obviously they should think about other individuals. Now, you do represent the Heritage Party. Perhaps you can tell us a little bit about what the Heritage Party can do as a party.
Yeah, I mean, the Heritage Party, you can look at our manifesto on our website. I mean, I set it up to be a socially conservative, common sense party that was about defending our heritage, being proud of our country, traditional family values, financial responsibility, and a lot of other common sense things. But, you know, in the last year, the major thing that has been in the forefront of everybody's minds is free speech and liberty. Because our liberties, our civil liberties, have been taken away from us under emergency regulations. We've got to end that. As the Mayor, I will be in charge of the police, and I will remind the police to follow their oath, and their oath is to uphold human rights. And what's happened at the moment is you've got police officers enforcing regulations which are legally repugnant to our fundamental freedoms, going round closing businesses, fining people for not wearing a mask or for meeting their friends for a coffee in a group. This is absolutely wrong. And we need to stop it, because this is creeping fascism, to be honest with you, that we're having in our country. And I don't think many of the other candidates are actually being honest about the direness of our situation, you know, how terrible our situation is. And some of them are actually pushing the agenda. The big two parties, they're pushing this agenda and they're taking away our freedoms. You're not going to get them back with them. But I'm saying I'm an alternative which is going to stand up for free speech, for liberty, to get your civil liberties back. And as Mayor, I will use my power to do everything I can to restore civil liberties to the city.
And in London in particular, obviously there's a massive amount of news reporters, either working for the Big Five. There's also a lot of independent journalists out there. And we have noticed over the last few weeks that you've been harried by the police at times. At other times they've been reasonable. There is some kind of a strange balance there. But will you redress the way in which the lesser press, should we say, the more individuals amongst the press, the ones without the big unions, the ones who are not in the Big Five, will you make it easier for them to be able to report on matters, whatever those matters may be, however it might upset perhaps those in power, because they don't have that freedom that the others seem to enjoy by having a national trade card. Is that right? Should people not be allowed to go out and make those journalistic endeavours themselves? And where does anyone start anyway, if you would, David?
Yeah, what's disturbing, and what I've heard from a lot of independent journalists, is they've been stopped by police officers just for filming in a protest or an event or something, and they've been asked to prove they're in the press, and they haven't had an NUJ card, and then the police say, you're not a legitimate member of the press. Well, that's ridiculous. I mean, we're in a different world now. We've got the internet, we've got YouTubers. I mean, if you don't work for a big television station, you are still a reporter. If you can still be a journalist and report on something, I speak to certain YouTubers with channels who've got huge followings, but they don't have an official trade union card. I consider them members of the press. Who is it for the police to define whether you're in the press or not? I mean, if you're reporting on something, I think you should have the freedom to report and to do so.
Bearing that in mind, will you be speaking as a mayor to the commissioner, even not as the mayor, but would you petition them through the Assembly, for example, to please rethink what those situations are like? Because it does reflect upon those who are policing us, the public. So would you actually be looking at that more or less straight away anyway? Because those freedoms have impacted on your rights as a candidate. I mean, we saw a particular article with you a few weeks back, and I think it was abhorrent to anyone that watched it. They were basically telling you needed to give yourself permission to go out into a public gathering, which you're an Assembly member, and you needed to actually report back on that to the Mayor of London. That's actually preventing you doing your job. I mean, how did that go, and would you be looking at measures that will perhaps curtail those things? Perhaps re-education might be the politest way of putting it.
Yeah, I mean, that was ridiculous. I was out in Richmond upon Thames, and that was at the time where you weren't supposed to meet more than one other person in a public place. And I was sitting on a bench with two other people. A number of police officers came along and said I didn't have the right to be there and talk to people, go home. I said, well, I'm just observing what's going on. I'm a London Assembly member, but they wouldn't accept that, and they started telling me what my job was and giving me a lot of hassle and saying, well, you still don't have the right to be here. I mean, I got so much support from real people and citizens who just thought this was absolutely ridiculous. But yeah, as mayor, I will instruct the police officers not to go enforcing these kind of stupid rules where people aren't going to allowed to meet their friends in a park.
David Kurten, as always, thanks for joining our opinion here today.
You're welcome.